The Square Ball Podcast.
Hello there and welcome to the show. Dan here along with Phil Hay from The Athletic. How are you doing, Phil? Day one of the season. We're underway now. Should we get straight into it and talk about yesterday's game against Cardiff? And
I can't take it, Daniel. I came at the ground yesterday and somebody said to me, it's August the 6th. And I think you can see that on everybody's faces. People thinking we're only one game in here and already it's like this. How many games do we have at Elland Road like this? Elland Road can't be totally unique in this sense, but it does just seem to be a kind of magnet for mayhem. You know, that game yesterday really did play out like it was a game with everything riding on it. Like it was, kind of like the last game of the season, game that was going to define everything. And you'd sort of asked me on the live stream we did on Sunday, does the first game of the season define what comes next or set the tone? And I sort of said, well, it's a little bit early to say that. But it felt as if the players were playing that way, at 2-0 down, as if they knew that they needed to get something from that game. And I think the fallout would have been pretty negative had they lost it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It was about setting the tone, maybe even just in terms of how the fans receive this team and the ownership and the direction that this is all going. We needed to see something, didn't we? And it's actually interesting. I loved your report on the game, and I will read this one word for word. But every coach who braves the dugout discovers that Elland Road does not do beige. It has taken Farke one game to find that out. Yeah,
it felt a bit yesterday like Gelhardt against Norwich, like the last minute goals that seemed to come so often. And I think it was good for Farke that they clawed it back. I mean, I guess that kind of goes without saying. But there is this question, isn't there? And this was the sort of gist of the read this morning. This question about who is actually going to be at Leeds when the window closes. I think the bigger question, kind of who wants to be at Leeds when the window closes. To go back to that Liam Cooper quote of, if you don't want to be here, then fuck off, was what he said, at the end of last season.
That's next year's Valentine's card sorted, Phil.
Oh, I mean, some people have genuinely taken him as well, didn't they? That I think was the Max Verber defection, was that I want to be elsewhere, I want to go. But it'll please Farke, aside from the fact that they dominated a lot of the game, and they really did batter Cardiff in the second half. They're comfortably the better team and absolutely deserve something from the game. I think they deserve to win it, to be quite honest, without pretending that they want flaws in the performance and without pretending that they want some quite glaring issues that we, all knew about, had spoken about beforehand, were kind of amplified by or magnified by the game itself. I think to see them still pushing through in the 95th minute and scoring tells them that the players wanted it. They wanted the result, and also speaks pretty highly of the fitness levels. And I think in what has been a really short pre-season, those are the two things that he was able to really work on: fitness and tactics. It's personnel for him, really. I think that is the lesson of yesterday's game, that they are still quite a distance from being finished when it comes to positions being filled, enough cover and enough depth, and being totally set up to really have a go at promotion.
What did you make of the style of football then? Because it feels like we saw, like you say, the sort of the base of the pyramid being laid down there yesterday, if you like in terms of the fitness and the passing style. And now it's the personnel that we get that we will use to build on that. But what did you make specifically of the style? Much more possession based than we saw last season,
and very intense as well, possession based. But and so decent amount of control in it. There were points at which they were definitely lax in possession. There were obviously two moments where they got caught out defensively, and I think while they need goals and that clearly needs to be addressed, I think Leeds are a team who for a couple of years now have been out of the habit of clean sheets, out of the habit of restricting opposition attacks, and it was, I think, quite telling how few opportunities Cardiff needed to very nearly win that game yesterday. I mean, they offered literally nothing after half time, and not so much in the first half either, but the two occasions where they got through and caught Leeds out on either flank, they were able to score. And that Farke said afterwards he thinks he can address that. I think he can address it quite quickly, but that is one area that definitely needs to improve. I really liked the balance between Ampadu and Archie Gray. Archie Gray's debut was terrific, I thought, for 17-year-old, and I think everybody came away thinking he is that good, and a lot of us felt that anyway. A lot of people who've seen with the 21s will have believed that, but physically and technically he coped no problem yesterday. But I like Ampadu slightly deeper, Gray with a bit of license to push forward. I think one of the reasons why it's a little bit difficult to properly analyse Farke's football at the moment is that front four, while it's got a lot of pace and it's got a lot of talent and creativity, it's clearly imbalanced. It needs a 9 in it as opposed to somebody like Nonto. I'm not saying Nonto shouldn't start, but you need a centre forward in the centre forward's role. And Farke keeps making that point himself, that it isn't as he'd want it to be. And I think that meant that Leeds had to be slightly one-dimensional in the way that they played yesterday. They had to rely on the pace and the trickery to make it happen. And it's not that Farke is a long ball manager at all. You look at the stats at Norwich, he really is quite the opposite, or was in the Championship when he was manager there. But having a natural goal scorer up front, a proper centre forward, makes a difference, I think, automatically will make a difference to the way Leeds play. But the fact is they were better than Cardiff. Not perfect, not without flaws, not without things that need to be addressed. But, there was one team trying to win that yesterday, and there was one team who should have won it.
In terms of the defensive structure then, do you think we're still seeing a little bit of a hangover? And did this translate into the atmosphere, actually, maybe in a more broad sense? The ghosts of last year maybe haunting like Pascal Struijk, who's had a really, really tough couple of years and has struggled, I think, under whether it's the weight of expectation, but maybe it was the post-Liverpool when he broke Harvey Elliott's leg. He never seemed to be quite the same player after he came back after that, and he's still taking that little bit of time to regain his composure, because there were a couple of occasions where you saw a ball being sort of floated over his head and he looked a little bit all at sea.
I think there are quite a few players at Leeds, or have been a few players at Leeds, who've suffered on the basis that the club's form has just dropped through the floor. From 2021 onwards, you could apply that to Meslier. I think you have others like Joe Gelhardt, who hasn't really pushed forward, to the extent where he would have been an option up front, you'd have thought, yesterday. But it was Nonto who Farke preferred, and I totally understand that. I think probably we might have actually called the lineup right on Sunday, amazingly. But we were kind of saying that, that might be the shout. People are making the point, I think it's a good one in the first half, that the back five were all here last season. The back five are existing members of a defence that's been struggling for a long, long time. And whether that's because of individual personnel or because of structure or a mixture of both, the fact is that Leeds have been conceding an awful lot of goals for ages now. And I think there are games where somebody like Sam Byram at left back, for example, is going to come under far more pressure than he did when he was on in the second half. But he made a difference. And, there's a fresh player, there's a new player, there's a new signing. I accept that his injury record has not been great. And I think I said yesterday, before the match, that's what he'll be judged on more than anything, is can he stay fit through the season? That's what this transfer, how it will be looked at. That's the lens that you'll look at it through. But he is a good player. We know from experience with Byram that he is talented, and he tightened things up. He was more effective, I felt, in that role than Leo Helder had been in the first half. And it just made you think that the team still needs freshening up. That lineup yesterday was built largely on retentions, with the exception of Ampadu. Byram, another new player to the fore. Darlow, I think, will come into the frame before long. I don't think Farke has signed him to sit on the bench. But fresh blood elsewhere, it would make a difference. And I think it would make a difference at the back. And even with somebody like Charlie Creswell, a couple of occasions where he probably took the ball on too far or further than he should have done in the opposition half, but looked really solid. And after a very strong, convincing loan at Millwall in the end, somebody there to be used, somebody different, somebody who's probably worth a chance.
Yeah, and I thought with Creswell coming on, there was that first ball that came up towards his head, and he just powered in there and absolutely went through the back of the attacker. And it was a stark...
It was a techie, wasn't it? It was like an Undertaker tombstone.
Yeah, it was a stark reminder, but also a comical reminder of the Championship and the style compared to the Premier League, where you might argue it's a little bit more, I don't know, sophisticated than stuff like that in the Premier League. But at that moment, it needed somebody to get in there, be dominant and win that header. And the crowd responded to it as well, and responded to him carrying it out, even though maybe he was a little bit indisciplined in his positioning and it left a bit of a gap that somebody had to fill. But under the circumstances and given how deep Cardiff was sat, it was worth it, wasn't it? It was nice. It was exciting.
People do like that as well. Like, football has become, as time's gone on, it's become more technical, or the analysis of it has become more technical. Everybody is so now fixated on skill and finesse and everything else. But there is place in the game still for challenges like that. And I always feel with Creswell that you get a mixture of both things. He is good on the ball. He does know how to use it. but he's pretty uncompromising, and he seems like a brave centre back to me. We've kind of been banging the drum for him for a little while, haven't we? I think we were all quite surprised at the way in which Leeds seemed willing to let him go in January, had the right offer come in. But I think, having seen that he could cope with Millwall, side, who were up around the playoffs right the way through last season, it seems like madness, really, not to think that he could do you a job this season, especially when the light is centre-back, and more so now with the injury to Liam Cooper. We haven't had any news on that yet, but it didn't look particularly good.
No, do we know exactly what that was? Because I've watched the replay of that, and he just seemed to kind of, I don't know, jar his whole leg, but the injury seemed to be centred to somewhere around the ankle.
Yeah, that's what Farke was saying afterwards, at the ankle kind of foot area, having a look at exactly what the damage is. But, that looks to the naked eye like it's going to be an absence of some sort. You don't imagine him, looking at the way he was trying to walk behind the goal line and struggling. You don't see him being at Birmingham on Saturday. And I feel for him as well, because he does have this offer from Saudi Arabia. And I think in his situation, with 12 months to go, 31 now, a lot of football behind him, it's very different, I feel, to Max Verber's situation. Verber seemed to be saying, I want to be elsewhere. I just want to go and play for another club, want to go to the Bundesliga. I think this is more of a kind of life decision for Cooper. But what the effect will be of this injury, it might well have been that he was minded to stay anyway. But if it is fairly long term, or if it isn't great, then you would imagine that would put that move in doubt.
£10 million, and we'll start to talk. I think seems fair if we're talking.
Yeah, seems about right. Yeah,
Saudi money. Yeah, it does feel like. I think maybe you saw this in the fact when Creswell came in, just something different. Maybe that's what it does need. It needs freshening up, that different voice, that different presence in there.
Yeah, again, I liked Ampadu yesterday, and Archie Gray as well. It is different. It is fresh. I mean, I said the team would be built on retentions. Aside from Ampadu, Gray's probably the exception there. It was his debut, although I think it's only circumstance that stopped the debut coming much sooner. He probably would have played in the League Cup last season at least, had it not been for the ankle injury that he had in the summer, that game against Villa. And then a virus around about the time of the early rounds of the Carabao Cup. But it's been in the pipeline, in the post for a while. And you can see, the game against Shrewsbury this week is the sort of game that you would set aside a 17-year-old for normally. But you got to think that Farke will be looking at him at the moment and saying, well, listen, Birmingham's the priority on Saturday. I need the Gray Ampadu axis again, and you hold him back and use somebody else. He looks ready for it, I think, and he was a big plus from the game yesterday.
Yeah, it was really nice to watch him, and sometimes you forget that he was only 17. He was very, very composed, wasn't he? Just got caught on a couple of occasions, and his positioning sometimes was a little bit askew, as Farke picked up on in the post match. But I mean, so few things you can actually fault him on compared to all the good stuff that he did. It was a really accomplished performance, wasn't it, for a 17-year-old? God.
Yeah, it's somebody was asking me afterwards how good was Sam Byram when he was young, and I was saying he was really, really talented. Still is, still good footballer. But I never quite had Byram on the level of, say, Fabian Delph, who's the one who I remember coming through right when I first started writing about Leeds. And the thing about Delph was that you'd launch him into the team, and it was just like shrug of the shoulders, and off he went, tricks and top performances. It feels a little bit like that with Archie Gray. You put him in for that game and it's fine. It's no sweat. He goes through it. He's going to have games where he gets targeted. He's going to have games that don't go well. It's inevitable. Even you remember recent memory with Calvin Phillips under Bielsa, as brilliant as he was, you had matches where Bielsa was substituting him after 20, 30 minutes. It does occur, and the more attention that's on Gray, the more opposition players are going to try and target him. But I think for now, and you'd like to think that we'll see additions in the centre of midfield, but I think for now he's a starting player. I think he stays in the team, as does Ampadu.
I have to say that moment where he span on the ball, he did get tackled or lost the ball like almost immediately afterwards, but just to turn out of there were sort of 2 or 3 players swarming him, and he just span on the ball, and I thought, imagine having the balls to do that at 17 years old in front of 36,000 people in a football stadium. It's quite something.
But that's what marks out really top footballers, elite footballers, is it just comes really naturally to them, and they know that they can do it, and they know that they can pull it off. Some of the tricks and it was League One, but some of the tricks that Delph used to do, you just thought it's like he's playing in the street, and really, really unfazed by it. I think there were a couple of moments like that with Gray where his feet just looked great. But the bit that stood out for me was late in the second half where he came from a deep midfield position to just suddenly pop up in this patch of about 20 yards of space, with the kind of the freedom to pull the strings and to pick a pass from there. And it's one of the things I've noticed with him. He's clearly very good on the ball, technically proficient, but he seems to be great at finding gaps and putting himself in areas where he can play and cause a problem. It could well be a big season for him, this one.
Yeah, you mentioned Ampadu there. I thought it was great. And on the evidence of yesterday, and it's only a small sample size, but a bargain at 7 rising to 10 million quid. He seemed really, really just very, very tidy and efficient.
Well, it comes back to the fact that there are good players in this squad. It's just not complete, and the balance isn't right. And I think the balance is exactly what Farke needs. And if you give him that, I get the feeling that Leeds will be really competitive. And it seems to me that it's not that there's just one position to address, but a dependable, reliable, prolific number 9 would make such a difference, I think, as a kind of basic starting point. I mean, there will be changes before the end of the window. They will sign other players. I'm sure of that. I think it's looking increasingly likely that we're going to see Tyler Adams go quite shortly. Chelsea looking like they're very keen on him, expecting that to move forward this week, although it's not as if they're the only club that like him. But I was saying previously that with Farke, it will probably be a relief to get to the end of the window, and it will be nice for him to know exactly what he's got, exactly what he hasn't. Because I think even now, if we were saying to him, can you say 100% that Harrison will be here, that Gnonto will be here, what's the state of play? I think he would say he's not sure. I think he would say it's difficult to answer that because you don't know what's going to happen in the last few weeks of the window. And you've asked me a few times, did I think Tyler Adams would stay? And I've been quite sort of equivocal about it and said, well, look, the 49ers would like him to stay, but really, who's going to bid for him? And if the bid's good, if there's an offer that he wants to take, then he goes, doesn't he?
Yeah, Chelsea does seem like a slightly strange one in terms of the amount of personnel they've got in midfield. Is there a home for him there? I don't know. And is he, I don't know, is he of that quality yet? Because I do have slight question marks about his passing, his work rate and his positioning and all that sort of stuff is great, but I just wonder about his passing sometimes. What do you think?
I think those are fair questions, yeah, but that contracts at Chelsea are very, very good. They got Pochettino, who is the sort of coach that you would really want to play under. He's very highly regarded, has done good things in the past. It's just a really tempting move all round, isn't it? And I think, pound for pound, it's probably as good a move as Adams could expect. So we'll see how that one develops.
Yeah, further forward, just in terms of the attacking lineup, I thought it performed really, really well in spells in that game against Cardiff. Some beautiful moments, and you could see like Sinisterra he seems to play the game at his own pace sometimes, doesn't he, Sinisterra, and just have the ball like under his spell almost. There was that moment, I think, over towards the northwest corner when it looked like it was just going to run away from him, and he just trapped it dead under his foot. Just stopped it. He just stopped the game. And it just seems to be in his gift to do that whenever he wants. Will he be here, do you think, at the end of the window? Because he could be such a valuable player in this division.
I hope he will be, but you sort of answered your own question there. In as much as if you were out there looking for a pretty talented winger and you had money to spend, then you would be gravitating slightly towards somebody like him. Pre-season friendlies are always a bit of a nightmare to write about and to cover. So when they played Man United in Oslo, I was tweeting at halftime and I just said only halftime verdict is, Sinisterra in the Championship would be great. Definitely keep him. He's got terrific feet. Obviously, the big focus on Somerville's finish, which was an incredibly difficult chance to stick away from there. One of those that you wonder if another 99 goes at that, how many times would it find the bottom corner? But there was, just before it as well, terrific spin from Sinisterra to give himself the chance to shoot in the first place and create that deflection that Somerville stuck away. And that's what you get. There were little moments yesterday too where Gnonto's feet, so good and so quick and so difficult to defend against. He was really unlucky not to score with that chance that hit the bar. It was a top save from Anik, who had a pretty good game for Cardiff, I thought. But as a whole, I enjoyed it. I can't say I missed VAR. I thought the referee had a really good game. I thought he was right with the penalty calls. I didn't think any of them were penalties. it flowed, it was engaging, it was immensely frustrating for everybody. You could feel that at 2-0 down. And it's not as if we're coming away saying that is a statement performance or a statement result. But it was like old times, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would debate whether the ref had a really good game. I thought he was adequate. But then, as a home fan, we always think refs are absolutely abysmal no matter what, don't we? Then they're against our team. I just thought
I was just going to say, I remember you saying on Sunday morning that he sounded like he was 6 years old. So that I think he gets decent marks.
Yeah, there are just moments with the officials where I felt they were guessing. Rather than, like, there was a moment particularly, couple of really obvious deflections, throw-ins that they got wrong, and it's only a throw-in near the halfway line, fine, but you want the decisions to be right, don't you? I just thought sometimes they just guessed and they weren't quite sure. I mean, it must be hard. It must be hard being a ref.
The big calls, I think they got right. There were some very tight offsides. One in particular with Ayling, that where Dan James stuck it away at the back post, would almost certainly have gone to VAR, I think, because linesmen or assistants in the Premier League seem inclined to let it flow for that precise reason. But I thought when it was the key moments, the key calls, I thought they were pretty good. In
praise of the officials, though, I will say it was a pleasant change after experiencing VAR in the Premier League to see them put the flag up when they think it's an offside, and I don't mind them getting it wrong. I thought that afterwards, even though, if that had gone to VAR and it had been ruled onside by 3 millimeters or whatever and they'd drawn the lines, I'm quite fine to accept them getting some of them wrong, because the VARs have been getting stuff wrong as well. It helps the game to flow, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. You get a really good flow throughout. It was kind of odd, 6 minutes of injury time at the end of the game, because it seemed to be an average of about 20 across the country over the weekend. It was
30. See, Sunderland, I watched a bit of the Sunderland game when I got home afterwards. It was like 13 minutes in the second half alone.
I know, and I can't really say I'm a huge fan of that, because it seems to... I know the whole idea is that you're counting and you're keeping check on wasted time and everything else, but it just seems to change the shape of 90 minutes completely. It's kind of odd. And I also think we're probably going to find that it's fairly arbitrary as the season goes on. There are going to be games where the amount of injury time will seem completely baffling, because, a little bit like when they changed the offside rule or the handball rule or whatever else, nobody will be quite certain about what's going on or how this is being decided.
Yeah, and everyone will think it's against them.
Yeah, of course. I saw somebody tweet me this morning saying the reason we only got 6 minutes yesterday is because the EFL want to keep us in the Championship.
It's the conspiracy.
After one game.
Meant to ask you as well about one of the names that's emerged today in the last 24 hours, the AZ Alkmaar and Greece player, Pantelis. Can you say the surname for me? I don't want to get this wrong and offend any Greek listeners or viewers we might have.
Mine will be no better than yours, so go for it.
Chat, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to offend anybody.
I did ask the question about him this morning. Seemed a bit cold on that front. We know that there is the interest in Nat Phillips at Liverpool, but as of this morning, didn't seem to have been much in the way of further developments with that. Tyler Adams was the one first thing that became clear that seems like it's at the point of starting to move him to Chelsea.
Sounds like Liverpool are asking quite a lot of money for Nat Phillips as well, Phil.
I think they are. Depending on what you class as a lot of money, I mean, it would be, I think, in the region of about £10 million, and they might say that is absolutely market value at the moment or thereabouts. But again, they are going to have to think, and I think the injury to Liam Cooper will dictate this as well. If that is looking like it's going to put him out for a little while, they need cover. And I thought it was, again, quite telling in the press conference yesterday when Farke was asked about incomings. He basically said, goalkeeper fine, everything else I'd quite happily have more, and that's really from front to back. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to be looking for action over the next 10 days or so.
And Farke cannot make it any clearer, can he, what needs to happen here? And he's very accepting and understanding of the situation, but in every interview he's done since he's become manager, he's made it clear what needs to happen. We need reinforcements.
Yeah, I mean, coaches always look for a balance, really, and they would they would rather be given too much than too little. That goes without saying. But they do tend to appreciate in most circumstances that you can't just buy. There has to be some make weight, and particularly when you get relegated. But he can see that he's short, and I think what he'll be mindful of is that if he is short going beyond the end of the transfer window, and if he's short for a lot of this season, it's probably not going to go as well as he would like it to go, and that reflects on him. And he's not here, I don't think, to be a championship coach for a long period of time. I think he wants to get out of the division as quickly as he can. So yeah, I think he's been pretty brutally honest so far about a lot of things. He hasn't tried to disguise much. He's answered questions when they've been put to him. After the friendly at York about Adams and Harrison and about Max Verber as well. And again, pre-match and post-match last week, it was a case of, yes, I need players and I need them in quite a few positions. But he is careful, I think, to reference the fact that, financially, they're not just able to do whatever they like. There have to be some compromises.
What do you make of the sort of intersection of this, the talk that the 49ers would attack the window aggressively? I just find it really, really interesting how that, as an idea from the 49ers, has then butted up against the arrival of the start of the season versus the reality of the contracts, how those three things are all kind of interacting together to make fans frustrated. And fans are always frustrated when they perceive a lack of action in the market. Everybody gets very, very, very upset, don't they, and wound up with transfer windows these days. But I just find out how those three things are kind of interplaying together a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, it is the thing you would ask of the 49ers, isn't it? If they were sitting down for an interview, you would ask them at this point, are you where you thought you would be? Given that I think we have to accept that they were never going to have everything done for the start of the season, and even Farke was making it clear right from the outset that this was going to be one that was going to need the back end of the window because of the situation they were in. How aggressive it is going to depend on how it looks at the start of September, isn't it? And whether or not we're looking at it and saying, yeah, do you know what, actually, all things considered, and given that they needed the extent of the window to do it properly, they have invested heavily. They have been as aggressive as they said they would be. Or if we're looking at it and thinking that they've undercooked it. With regards to the contracts, and Farke speaks about this quite a lot, the fact there isn't money coming in, although, for people like Tyler Adams or Jack Harrison or Nonto, Meslier, they would pay a fee. There would be a fee involved for them. But what you're talking about there is really players who Leeds want very keen to lose. That therein lies the problem. But as far as the release clauses go, the 49ers to an extent must have been aware of what were in the player contracts. There are other people at the club who would absolutely have been aware of what was in the contracts. Angus Kinnear, as CEO, signs these off. I get that Victor Orta is gone, director of football, who would have been involved in negotiations going back to 2017 for how players were signed. But it can't have been a complete surprise that, having gone down, some of these clauses were going to kick in. So while they make it problematic, they were always going to make it problematic on the basis that most contracts in the Premier League have a release clause of some sort, particularly with players of decent level of value. So I totally get. I was saying in my report this morning, I've been chasing the tail all summer. So realistically, you couldn't expect a barnstorming start to the season. And you joked yesterday about setting up a graphic of Leeds 4, Cardiff 0. You're trying to draw me into prediction. And I was sort of saying, I really don't know.
I got my 4 goals.
He did, yeah. I was saying I really don't know. I'm not totally sure. And it does feel like it will be a slightly slow burn potentially to begin with. So there is mitigation here, and there are excuses for the window being difficult, but I don't think there would be excuses for it going badly, if you know what I mean. I think by the end of the window they have to be seen to have done the right thing or thereabouts.
Yeah, and they've allowed the phrase about attacking it aggressively to seed. It's been one of those things that's kind of taken on a bit of a life of its own, and the problem is that will mean different things to different people. Mm-hmm. So people will interpret it and say, well, is this been aggressive? And obviously we've still got 3 weeks and a bit of the window to run, but it's going to, when you say things like that, it's going to raise question marks, isn't it?
Yeah, I think individually something like Ampadu at £7 million rising to 10, that to my mind falls into the fairly aggressive category, I think. Dalot less so in terms of finance, but I still think you're signing a good goalkeeper there who had the option of going to Bournemouth, but you've talked him into this move instead. But they need to do more. They need to do more. I think it's the key positions, isn't it? And particularly up front. I think where there will be an issue is if they go into September with, say, Bamford and Rutter as the two, and Matteo Joseph as the options up front. With injuries already having affected them, I think us having seen over the past 2 years that the injuries with Bamford can become niggly and can be drawn out from one hamstring strain into a few issues. They can't afford to make the same failings that the club have made previously, because that's the point, isn't it? That is the point of new ownership, is that things change and things are different. And the little that has been said so far is kind of pushed that message that things will change and things will be different, and that's what you have to see. But I do accept that we need the whole window in which to be certain about what's gone on, because it was never going to be done by now.
And another game this coming midweek, Phil, the Shrewsbury Cup game, as you mentioned earlier on, they're coming off the back of a 1-0 win in their season opener against Cheltenham Town. Obviously, we can't read anything into the tables right now. Not quite a Barnsley 7-0, this one to start the season, but you do wonder how many changes, not necessarily that Farke would like to make, but that he can make.
Yeah, because he was saying before the game and again afterwards that he'd been working with 16 players last week. There'd been a lot of injuries, and clearly there are a lot of injuries, no doubt about that. But I think because of that, he'll be incredibly mindful of the need to look after everybody for Birmingham, and not to take massive risks. This is a game where you feel that if he makes the right changes and picks a strong enough side, Leeds should get through. But just talking of compromise, he might have to make some compromises in this game, because he doesn't have two squads. He doesn't have two sets of 11 to pick from at the moment. So the lineup will be quite fascinating.
Yeah, so maybe managing minutes. Maybe Paveda gets a run out in this one.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Maybe Gelhardt, others like that. Perhaps get a few more minutes into Creswell's legs, that sort of thing. But I think, to go back to Archie Gray, even if you want to keep him ticking over, do you play him against Shrewsbury when you know that you need him against Birmingham on Saturday? I'm not so sure that you do.
Maybe you go with JB for this one instead of Archie Gray. Yeah. Okay. Well, we will watch this one with interest, and we will get together towards the end of the week, Phil, for the Friday show, and we'll see how we get on against Shrewsbury, and we'll preview Birmingham then as well. All right. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
We'll speak to you soon.
The Square Ball Podcast.